Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramazan. I'm very pleased to say my guest today is Indera Sagewan Alli, economist and political commentator, which makes her a double threat. Welcome back to the program, Indera.
Hi, Vernon.
Always wonderful having you on because we can talk about a wide range of subjects and there are so many things to talk about. But let's deal with the second part of the title I just gave you there. What's your take on the political season so far? It seems to be a particularly ugly campaign that's going on all sides.
Yes. Yeah, you're very right. It is almost as if we have regressed in terms of political maturity as a country. And what is being offered from the various political platforms that we're hearing from is really only about things like who's stealing from whom, who's sleeping with whom, who is doing weed, things that really are not about the people's business in the real sense and what politics should be about. Because at the end of the day, we are here about to elect a new government in office, to office, a government that will have the responsibility to manage this country. And what we're not hearing about how are we going to deal with the current challenges that is facing our largest energy earning sector, revenue earning sector, the energy sector. How are we going to generate sustainable employment? How are we going to diversify the economy? How are we going to deal with the possibilities of declining government or national revenue against the kind of expenditure pattern that has been built up over about the last 15 years? How are the various contenders for the position of government going to deal with these very, very critical issues? And we're already, over a month into the declared electioneering season, and the conversation is extremely empty on these very important issues.
Do you think to some extent we have to blame ourselves as a population for falling for those sort of tactics? Because really and truly we should be hearing about, as you mentioned, serious things. In a world which is uncertain right now, I think the IMF reduced the world growth predictions to 3% or something like that. That will affect us. Instead of hearing about personal attacks, we should be hearing about here's how we plan to balance and use the resources that we have available. But we seem to like hearing peacock and words being thrown around and character assassination.
And you're very right, Vernon. We as a people, we're not demanding anything different. It's almost as if as a society, we've lost our moral compass. Our moral compass, which tells us that this is right and this is wrong. It matters not who is executing. If it is wrong when the color that people are wearing is red, and the same thing is being done when the color is yellow, then the wrong remains a wrong. We seem to have lost that, and to a large extent, what in my view is dominating the national conversation is a kind of polarized political positioning. The conversation, the debate on both sides is not different, but the national conversation is polarized in the sense that it's either red or it's either yellow. And even though red is doing the same thing yellow is doing, there are people on both sides that can justify one and criticize the same thing on the other side. And we are, as a country, as a people, we are accepting that, as the factors that would lead us. When you read social media, for example, and you hear people saying, well, issues really don't matter at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it is about, the peacock and who's better at the peacock. What does that say about us as a country? And that's why very often we tend to say we get the government that we deserve.
Which is sort of sad when you think about it.
That's right.
I think you've said it on another platform that we regard politics in this country almost like a football match, which we sort of blindly support a team.
Correct.
And don't sort of sit down soberly and reflect on what the policies are. And quite often we don't even hear what the policies are.
Exactly. And then, we have, and the mix continues to change. So we have the emergence of some new forces. Late in the game, but then in politics, a short time could seem a long time. But then if you sit down critically and you analyze what is being put forward, one, if we accept the argument that a third force, and I'm using the direct name, is not able to win an election given the way in which we vote a government into power, given that we are accepting of the fact that the two leading political parties, the UNC/PP and the PNM on the other hand, both are split in terms of the seats that they currently hold in a very solid way, 18, and then we have the few marginal seats where the election will actually be decided. So you have a third force that is now emerging, but where does this third force come from? Where were these individuals for the last 5 years? Most of them were in the government of the day, and many issues that really excited the people of this country in 2010, and we voted out a regime that we thought was not acting in the best interest of the people, and we voted on an excitement and in terms of the possibilities of what this new political configuration that brought together many different elements, what it offered. So if we use one as an example, the whole issue of constitutional reform, issues such as fixed term fixed term in terms of Prime Minister, fixed date of elections, something as simple as that. And we had a government that had the majority in place to be able to very simply effect those changes. We didn't have those changes taking place. Many of the individuals who are now in this third force were there. So my question is, what did you do? How did you use your power and your influence in government to be able, with the majority that you needed in order to effect change, how, and you were not able to do it then, what is it that is different now that should convince me that I should give you an opportunity as a third element? One, if you go it alone, or two, if you now form an alliance, and we know the PNM is very clear, continues to be very clear, we're not interested in alliances. And therefore, if we now see that just before the election you form an alliance with the current government, what is there to allow us to believe that anything different will take place?
Do you think the population takes it seriously, given the fact that these are very familiar faces we've seen many times before, and as you mentioned, they were part of the current administration. They didn't affect some of the things they're talking about now. Therefore, the population must look back and think, well, how can we take you seriously?
It's the exact point that I'm making. Yeah. And even if...
What about the ILP in your view? I mean, obviously there's some level of taint there because of Mr.
There's
Warner.
a high level of taint there. And I cannot imagine that is Mr. Warner the political leader of the party at this point in time? I'm not even sure if they have one, but certainly
they've had ILP, high turnover as well.
Right, yeah. I think, but certainly ILP equals Jack Warner.
Right.
And I cannot imagine that Mr. Warner thinks that he can seriously win a seat in the next election. I think he's very intent on destroying the current government, and from all that he has offered, we're seeing that is certainly where that is going. The issue here is to what extent the information that he's putting out in the public domain will actually influence voters with respect to whether they give the vote, in my view, to the current government, or whether they give it to the PNM, or whether they simply withhold it.
But you think he's just preaching to the converted in terms of do you recognize anything he's revealed so far, his allegations, as being earth-shaking in any way?
No, but I think
or they're meant to undermine gradually.
Yeah, I think the one difference is while people, there may have been a perception that some of these things may have been happening, what by him saying it, or by him supposedly providing evidence, whether it's in the form of a check or some such thing, is simply providing the evidence that, okay, what you may have been thinking, and up to this point in time, I can now actually show you that there might be some amount of truth to it.
Ironically, that's the same thing that happened with him in FIFA, isn't it? Because people were talking about things long before.
Exactly.
Until the US action came into place.
Exactly. But all of it, in my view, and the more important issue to me, it really speaks to where national governance has gotten to, where the politics and political development in this country, where it has gotten to. And something needs to give. We clearly need change so that what we have can change. We cannot continue doing the same thing and get different results. We have to do something different, and it comes back to the issue of constitutional reform. Because as long as we vote a government into place under the Westminster system, as we are currently doing, it's going to be by and large a two-party race to the finish line. And any other configuration that emerges is going to be looking at how can I form an alliance with one or the other if I want to sit in the corridors of power. That is what it is, and what it will continue to be unless we change the way we put a government in office. So the whole issue of proportional representation is a critical factor that we need, and so therefore it comes back again to the maturity of us, of we the people, and we the people understanding that as entertaining as the peacock is, we should not vote for a government based on how good the old talk is, one, or whether we like the color of the t-shirt they are wearing. Mm-hmm. It has to be about who is going to change the dynamics of this country to ensure in a more meaningful way that the power does in fact reside with the people. To simply say serve the people, serve the people, serve the people is not, or that I am listening to the people, is not enough when you see in effect what is actually being delivered is not in the best interest of the people. It is not in the best interest of this country that we are so heavily dependent on government and on government expenditure to be able to access education, to be able to have to gain employment, because government right now is the largest employer. And much of that employment, unfortunately, is being generated through programs that are not sustainable. Through OJT, the OJT program that's employing the professional class, through the CPAP and the URP, etc. And that is why, you hear in between the notion that the next government has to make hard decisions. You have to make hard decisions because
we hear that every election, and nobody ever makes the hard decisions.
Nobody ever makes the hard decisions, and nobody is concerned.
And nobody touches CPAP because it often turns into a political tool come election time.
Exactly. But nobody is prepared to ask, how are you going to grow this economy in a sustained basis? Where are these sustainable jobs going to come from? How are you really going to move Trinidad and Tobago from being so heavily reliant on energy and fossil fuel energy to being a more balanced economy that is based on a variety of sectors really creating the revenue flows and the employment that we need? Those are the important issues. If we don't address those issues, we'll continue to have what is taking place. A heavy degree of brain drain, particularly amongst our younger people. Mm-hmm. So we are investing in training them, and when you would expect that now having trained them, they will now contribute to the development of the country, they are opting to go elsewhere.
Because there's no opportunity.
There are no opportunities. Because you cannot be trained as a technician in some cutting-edge ICT sector, and then you are offered a job under the returning professional mechanism that is going to, one, underpay you, and two, underemploy you, because you may be engaged in a job that has nothing, that is totally unrelated to the area in which you have studied.
Some sort of clerical position that they just happen to have open.
Exactly. Yeah. Simply because you have the resources and you must provide employment for that person, and you want to be able to boast of having something called full employment. But we do not have full employment in this country. It is artificially generated through the revenues that come from the energy sector via the government budget.
In terms of this administration's performance, obviously we're seeing a lot of activity this year with things being announced right, left and center, even though we're still on sort of shaky economic ground. Up to recently with the Maracas plan for $100+ million. Does that surprise you that in a time when other countries around the world are looking at ways of conserving their finances. We're still spending willy-nilly on odd projects like that?
Well, it's an election year, so as you say, we're not surprised about that. But in fairness to this government, I will say that they have performed. They get a very high grade when it comes to rural infrastructural development. A lot of that has taken place, and that is important, and we must not
undervalue. And that's, of course, playing to the base of this government as well.
Of course, and we must not undervalue that. A lot of that has taken place in the rural parts of this country, rural south of this country, and it is long overdue, and therefore credit must be given. But while that was taking place, what we didn't have running concurrently was the efforts at economic diversification and economic growth. We didn't have that happening. So that at the end of the day, it is what you have just described in terms of a lot of expenditure almost seeming to be willy-nilly, although not willy-nilly because needed expenditure. But when you match that against the fact that we have not seen the kind of growth in things like manufacturing, tourism, other sectors that we need, and we have even seen contraction in the energy sector, it is suggestive of an administration, of a governance period where we didn't have the kind of transformation that we needed.
Is it because the original plan was flawed or wasn't complete enough in terms of a roadmap to where we wanted to be in 5 years?
Well, I think it was just simply
I know we started off with Mary King was looking very carefully at diversifying the economy, but somewhere along the line we drifted away from.
Well, it is more the absence of that roadmap, I would say, and we didn't. The administration didn't spend sufficient time really plotting that roadmap in a meaningful kind of way. And so you had, it was almost a continuation of what the former government was in fact doing. The same new growth sectors were identified as the ones that we are going to be focused on. The same institutional vehicles were maintained and kept in place by and large, with probably some tinkering here or there, which really which didn't do anything meaningful. But we are 5 years further into time and into the game, and 5 years later having expended a lot of money, and yet we do not know what the vision is for any one of these new sectors that we are saying are in fact going to be the bedrocks on which the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is going to grow. So if we take manufacturing, and let me ask the question because I certainly don't have the answer. What is the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago supposed to look like 5 years from now? What is the fashion industry of Trinidad and Tobago supposed to look like 5 years from now? What is the niche that we actually focusing on? Where lies our comparative and our competitive advantage? Whether it is in fashion, whether it is in cultural, in cultural products, in tourism, where are the niches that we're focused on?
Shouldn't we be designing niches based on the reality as opposed to wishful thinking?
Absolutely.
I know we've been talking over the last few years about medical tourism, and I think to myself, we can't be serious. We can't even properly cater to the needs of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and we're talking about medical tourism.
But we talk about medical tourism, sport tourism, cultural tourism, business tourism, culinary tourism, but we can't be everything to everyone.
And plus tourism has a minuscule budget, actually, the ministry.
That is correct, very minuscule. It contributes at this point in time a very, very small percentage to our GDP, and not near enough how much it should be contributing to employment. But all of that comes back to the fact that we have failed to determine where we want to position ourselves in the tourism global value chain. And unless we do that, we will continue to be having this conversation in terms of where are we going with respect to tourism, and we will continue to hear about all these various areas, entertainment, tourism, and all kinds of things. But countries that have done it successfully have looked at where they are at the point in time. They have looked at the sector from a global perspective in terms of where the trends are, where the growth is taking place, where are the value points. They have come back home, they have analyzed where they are, where they operate within the value chain, and then they have redefined the value chain that they want to have existent within their countries. And there's so many examples I could cite for you. I could cite Mauritius in terms of its tourism offering and how it made that very clear decision that it was positioning itself, targeting a high-end leisure tourist, and therefore it then sought to match its product development, product design, and all its complementary services to ensure that it was able to attract and keep that kind of tourism. We could talk about Dubai, which created this mega
weird architectural tourism sort of thing.
Architectural tourism, leisure tourism in terms of being a desert and being able to offer you skiing, indoor skiing at any time of the year, so that
playing golf 1,000 feet up in the air.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that the product design is a function of where you want to position your country in terms of the kind of destination.
But
we've
those
not
two
answered
examples you
that
mentioned,
basic
though,
question.
But Mauritius and Dubai, we're talking people had vision.
That's the
It's one of the problems that we either lack vision or lack practical vision
both,
to get things done.
and that is the underlying factor. We are not sitting down and saying, whether it is tourism, whether it is fashion, whether it is manufacturing, where do I want to take this particular sector? We could come back again to Costa Rica making a decision. Yes, I'm an agrarian economy, but what I want, and the Prime Minister himself made that decision, I am going to transform my economy into an ICT-based economy. And then having painted that picture, I clearly don't have what it takes. What do I need? Went out and found Intel and asked Intel, what do I need in order to be what I want to be, to make this vision, because a vision is nothing if we do not then have an operational plan to make it happen. He came back with a checklist, that's the operational plan, and set about putting in place what was necessary in order to transform his economy. 30 years later, it is now a case that is taught in all of the top business school of the world in terms of a success story, in terms of how a country transformed itself in a very short space of time.
And even Costa Rica, when it comes to ecotourism, of course, zoomed in on
Another
that as well
area,
perfectly as well.
chocolate tourism. And you know, I have a particular pet peeve for the whole issue of agriculture and how we transform that, and the whole issue of cocoa, and the fact that we talk so much about it in Trinidad and we're not able to move beyond that. But I have to tell you, in Trinidad, and again, there is a disconnect between government and policy and what's happening on the ground in a real way. Because in a real way, there are initiatives in terms of the cocoa industry that are very excited about transforming Trinidad and Tobago into a chocolate destination. And there are people on the ground very passionate who are farmers, who are chocolatiers, who are on the ground doing this and wanting to do it, and there is a disconnect between them and the passion that they have and government policy and government spend in order to make it happen. What you need to happen here is you need to define, you need to form a cluster organization that brings together all of these major players. So you have the practitioners on the ground that I just mentioned, you have government and policy on the other hand, you have academia and research and development in the bodies of UTT, the University of the West Indies, the Cipriani Labour College, everybody tinkering with the concept of cocoa. And what we are failing to do is to bring all of it together and create that vision and that perspective for an industry that we want 10, 15 years down the road, and then ask ourselves, what do we need to do now in order to make that happen? And then develop that plan and then start working that plan in a very cohesive and in a very organized manner.
It involves having laser focus on certain areas,
Absolutely.
doesn't it? Not just scattershot approach.
Absolutely, but although there is a need for the laser focus, we can't wear blinders. So we have to have that laser focus, but constantly monitoring the market, constantly monitoring trends and seeing what is happening, and having a kind of laser approach that allows us to have flexibility to change and redesign and when required in order to make sure that we're not creating something that is obsolete even before we get there.
And that's the key to successful economies, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The ability to adapt to changing times.
Yes,
So
yes.
many other countries have had problems because they haven't adapted quickly.
Correct.
We're going to be in the same position, or perhaps we already are, because we had many decades to adapt and diversify, but we didn't. We stayed on one
Yes.
crutch, I guess, really, energy sector, and that's where we are now. In terms of government, we're almost out of time for this segment, but I know you've volunteered to stay on for a second part. It seems to me a lot of projects undertaken by this administration and previous ones are done on whims as opposed to actual studies. I think of life sport, I think of the Mashal Montana recording thing, where money went into that as well. Somebody just comes up with an idea, and then they throw money at it to see if it sticks.
But it's linked to the conversation we were
Right,
just having, because what we have is ad hoc governance and ad hoc decision making in the absence of having that clear. If you don't have a very clear vision in terms of how you want to develop and where you want to take your country, then whatever comes comes on your desk that may simply take your fancy, you may simply jump on it.
That looks good here.
Yeah,
Pour
exactly.
some money, yeah.
So and then too, we tend to have government operating in this very short period, these five-year period, which we have to be realistic to, and therefore looking for quick fixes or quick wins that can keep the media excited and keep the headlines going.
Yeah.
And that tends to be a problem. Now, I will say that that's a reality, and we have to not be upset with ministers and prime ministers when they need these kinds of things, because you need visibility, you need those signs of success.
You need to win the next election.
You need to win the next election, but I'm saying simultaneously you have to be focused on the issue of long-term development.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow, or actually very shortly after this. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Indera, for being on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been watching 101. Join us again tomorrow for part 2.